but also where the public sector accounting community may be going. And then I would also like to share a few ideas about, well, what is happening right now in the community and where these studies of public sector accounting are going. Well, in a way, there has been, in the last few years, there has been a lot of stock taking in our community. Basically, many people trying actually to develop systematic reviews, structured reviews, bibliometric analysis of public sector accounting research from different angles, people studying budgeting, reporting, sustainability issues, and things like this. What we have tried to do with a few colleagues was to take a very long-term view of how public sector accounting developed over the last 50 years, which meant basically considering more than 2,000 papers published in a variety of journals on public, like in the area of public sector accounting. And you can find more details about this study in financial accountability and management. The study is now published there, and I put also the reference there so that, like, if you are curious, you may take a look. But there are a couple of messages that I wanted to bring to the table today from that analysis that we conducted. One has to do with what public sector accounting is. Because sometimes you go around, for example, if you go to the United States, you say something like, I am into public sector accounting, and they look at you and they say, what is this exactly? Because they are more used to call it public sector budgeting, public finance, public sector accountability. But I remember once an editor of a public administration journal from the United States telling me, oh, don't call it accounting. I'm like, well, I'm a professor of accounting, so it's very difficult not to call it accounting, right? But this is a little bit, probably there is someone who has not muted the microphone. So if you can just check if microphones are muted, because I think sometimes I hear some noise. Really, thank you for this. So yeah, and then it is interesting, actually, then some people are referring more to accountability, others performance measurement. So what is exactly public sector accounting? Well, personally, I have a view. I have a view that public sector accounting is a very wide field encompassing budgeting, financial management, reporting, auditing, so everything that has to do with what we would call calculative practices and accounting for something in the public sector. And if we look at how it emerged also, it is quite interesting because we may think, oh, actually, public sector accounting journals have always been there. No, they were not always there. Public sector accounting journals especially emerged towards the end of the 80s and the beginning of the 90s. So basically, before that, a lot of public sector accounting topics were actually covered in public administration and management journals. So if we look at the, as I said, at the analysis that we did, we ended up discovering in a way that actually, for example, in the 70s, most of what we would call today public sector accounting research was published actually in public administration and management journals. Why? Because at the time, like public sector accounting journals were not even so fashionable. Some of them did not even exist. And then generalist accounting journals would tend to focus more, for example, on the private sector. So it is interesting to notice that actually over the years, gradually, we have seen an emergence of public sector accounting journals, so dedicated journals to this kind of field. Of course, we may think of FAM, but we may think also of practice-oriented journals like Public Money and Management, for example. And then over the years, we have noticed also an increase in interest in generalist accounting journals, with some of them actually being very much also open towards public sector accounting. I'm thinking of journals like Critical Perspectives on Accounting or Accounting Auditing and Accountability Journal, for example, and others being a little bit less open. So we see less public sector accounting studies, for example, in some of the, let's say, American accounting journals. But again, this is a little bit changing. So over the years, we have observed that even generalist accounting journals have grown their interest in public sector accounting. So overall, I would say there has been a growth in the interest on public sector accounting, and from an area which was mostly around public administration journals, it has become an area which has expanded towards also public sector accounting journals, and today also accounting journals. But this has an important implication for anyone who is interested in this area. And the implication is, whenever we carry out, for example, a literature review, or whenever we need to reflect on gaps in the literature, we cannot just say, oh, this is not like to be found in the accounting literature, because there may be a topic which is actually not covered in the accounting literature, but it's still about public sector accounting and it's covered in the public administration literature. So whenever we, for example, we write a paper, we need to be extremely careful in claiming, oh, nobody has looked into this, because we may discover that it's because of the journals that we have read that we haven't found a reference to certain topics. And of course, like different journals may have different attentions to different issues. Of course, this is the first message I wanted to raise, the fact that public sector accounting, more than probably other types of studies in accounting, is very interdisciplinary. And you cannot just say, oh, let's focus on the accounting side of this, because there is a strong public sector side, which still is very present. Another thing that I wanted to highlight, coming from, on the one hand, experience with this, and of course our analysis, is that in a way there is a little bit of a divide between, let's say, the studies in public sector accounting. As I said, there is a more what we would call a North American, and in a way, like more public administration focused kind of, let's say, area of studies in public sector accounting. As I said, it's more about public budgeting sometimes, performance measurement, accountability, rather than accounting or reporting per se. And then there is, on the other side, there is more a European, Australian, New Zealand approach, which we find, and it's more rooted in the accounting community than the public administration one. Of course, it's an oversimplification here. And as you may see, well, in a way, there is a big issue here. On the one hand, there is a big divide, and we see that published papers mostly come from those areas, those geographical areas, and as I said, they are divided a little bit between public administration more in North America and accounting more in Europe or Australia. But there is an enormous, let's say, part of the word which is missing if we look at certain journals, right? So basically, the word is not just North America, Europe, or Australia. With all due respect, of course, to North American or Europeans or Australians, because the world is also made up of South America, Africa, Asia, which is big, and you, of course, you you are from Asia. And for example, recently there has been an enormous, let's say, activity, especially coming from Indonesia. From what I see, I sit in the board of a few journals, and you can see that submissions from Indonesia to many journals are actually increasing. But sometimes the struggle is that from certain geographical area, people then still struggle to publish in some journals. And I talk about this quite freely because I am originally from Italy, and I spent several years trying to convince people that a paper about Italy deserved publication. Um, that's one of the points, right? There are some countries which are considered cool, and some other countries, well, why do I need to read something about Spain or Italy or Ghana? And when you receive a review like this, you are like, well, why do I need to read all of the papers about North America or the UK, right? So this is a little bit the kind of situation we are in right now. From our analysis, we really highlight that there is a predominance still of what we would call the global north or the Western world, and especially some countries like which are overly represented in the papers that are published. Um, Going into more specifically the topics which are addressed in those studies, we find, as I said, that in, let's say, there are some topics which are a little bit evergreen. So they are always there. They've always been there because they are key in the public sector. For example, budgeting. What is interesting, however, is that if we go, let's say, if we look at the North American take on this, budgeting is seen very much as something either political or from an economic perspective, what we would call public finance perspective. Whereas if we look more at the European perspective on this, budgeting is often studied through the organizational or sociological lenses. So it's very much a different kind of approach taken there. It's like one is more economics and political science, and the other one is more organization or sociology. Similarly, for example, there is this big theme of accountability. And accountability, again, is an evergreen. But the paradox is that accountability is seen more as a political, let's say, kind of concept in, let's say, more from the North American perspective, or in public administration studies. There is, for example, also a strong tradition coming from the Netherlands around the studies of accountability. But there is a way of looking at accountability more linked to political processes. And then there is another kind of approach, which is more linked to accounting studies, which has to do with accountability as a underlying principle for accounting, for reporting. So it's very much focused on, let's say, more accountability for the use of resources or for results, rather than per se political accountability. So again, what is interesting is that we have two sides. We have topics which are even called in the same way, like budgeting or accountability. But then if you look at those papers in the two sides, they do not even quote each other. So basically, you have people studying accountability under the accounting literature. They will not sometimes, they will ignore sometimes the developments in the public administration literature, and vice versa. So you will rarely see, I don't know, Thomas Schillemans or Bouvens to quote anyone from accounting, like John Roberts, okay? And this is quite interesting. Basically, there is like this disciplinary separation, which does not allow, in a way, to capture the full range of opportunities which could come from having more an interdisciplinary kind of exchange. Another area which is quite interesting when you look again at separate developments, well, especially in the 90s, there has been, at the beginning of this century, there has been a lot of attention in certain journals toward the development of management control systems. And it is quite interesting because actually, in the public administration community, you will never hear anyone talk about management control. They will talk about performance measurement or performance management system. Then if you read the papers, they converge on the phenomenon that they are observing. They are observing systems which are in place to measure and manage the performance. But again, they call this in different ways, and then they use different theories to look at them. So there is also, well, in a way, there is also a specific area which is quite, let's say, fashionable, for example, in the accounting community, which is this area of looking at the move towards accruals accounting, standard setting, reporting. And this is very interesting because in the public administration kind of community, nobody will care about this. And then in the accounting community, there are even groups of people only doing this for the whole life. They have been looking at accruals accounting moves. And basically, this is quite interesting because it really reveals how actually some of our studies are very much like isolated from other kind of communities that are actually carrying out similar kind of research. So clearly, if accruals accounting, for example, is adopted for accountability purposes, why is there a complete separation between those studies about accruals accounting and studies about accountability? Okay, so what I am trying to say is that actually, on the one hand, public sector accounting is a very wide kind of, let's say, area of research and study, and there is an increasingly wide community around this. But then there are certain areas which tend to be developed independently from, let's say, others. And my view, and of course, this is my opinion in a way, it could be that people are perfectly fine with remaining in a certain niche, in a certain specific area, and being very specialized in that area. But sometimes I wonder whether actually we could have more impact as a community and we would have, to say something like more meaningful, if we were like able to actually open to more dialogue. And I would say that over the last few years, actually, there have been attempts at opening up more and more dialogue and to be, let's say, to try also to be more influential beyond our more narrow communities. And I think this is a very good signal. But as I said, everything in this slide is very much trying to highlight how actually trying to create niche, trying to create isolated communities, or trying to exclude certain communities from the reflections is not good. So, like, if we look at the past, sorry, I said I wrote North America, but the point was South America here. So the point is, we need to make sure that actually we promote more dialogue in our community. We ensure that actually we know what others are doing around the phenomena that we are interested in, rather than just continuously, let's say, looking at our own navels and discussing always with people who are like-minded. I think we need to be brave enough and actually listen to people who have also different views and bring different experiences. And this also applies, as we were saying, to, for example, being more open to listen to what other continents are doing, because the world is not only all about what happens in North America or in Europe. The world is not only about accruals accounting or budgeting or management control. Public sector accounting is much wider than this. So I hope my way of thinking is clear there. It's more about like encouraging dialogue as much as possible. The other kind of message I wanted to highlight, which is, in my view, is very important also for our future as a community, has to do with the evolutions. So in a way, we have seen some of the features of this evolution, and basically and of the field. But let's have a look also at how this field has evolved over the years, because this is quite interesting too, because it also explains in a way where we are today. As we saw before, there were already studies concerning public sector accounting, public sector financial management, and especially public sector budgeting in the 70s. And as I said, most of them were actually published in public administration journals, because a lot of the journals we know today were not even there in the 70s. I know that some of the people who may be in this virtual room may have not been there in the 70s too. I was there. Okay, so I was little, but I was there. So basically, in the 70s, a lot of studies were based actually in the United States or North America, and they adopted mostly economic or political perspectives. From the 80s onward, studies of public sector accounting starts to look more also at, for example, reporting. They start to look at issues of accountability, and they start also to take more a managerial perspective, an organizational perspective. So instead of looking at the impact of budgets on the whole economy, they will look at the impact of budgets on the behaviors of people within an organization, for example. And this is quite interesting, because there is a parallel between, let's say, this and the emergence of new public management, basically. So in the mid-90s, people started to discuss managerial reforms, market-related reforms, and this, of course, shaped a lot the development also of accounting studies in this area. Why this? Because if you want to apply managerial principles, if you want to apply market-based principles, accounting becomes the key tool, the key techniques, which translate those very general and abstract ideas into something very practical, very operational. So in a way, this meant that actually between the 80s, the 90s, and the beginning of this century, accounting became very much the key tool for translating new public management into practice. At the same time, and this is the key message here, what happened was that new public management provided very often the key context where accounting could be observed. So in a way, since there was an enormous growth in the need also for accounting, let's say, competencies in the public sector, and there was an enormous also need for, let's say, strengthening accounting system in the public sector because of new public management, then, of course, studies, even, let's say, the training in public sector accounting emerged in many places. I can confess to you that, well, when I studied at the university, I wanted to become an auditor for the private sector. At the time, it was very fashionable. And then I took an exam in public sector accounting. So I discovered the public sector because of this exam. And I started to be very interested in this. And I wrote also my dissertation in this, and I did my PhD on that. But basically, at the time, I was really encouraged to join academia because there was an enormous need of people with accounting competencies who could teach also public sector managers about accounting. I remember traveling a lot at the time and going to, for example, municipalities around Italy, and there were people who wanted to learn how to use accruals accounting, or how to apply accruals accounting, or how to read a budget or a report. So in a way, this was a little bit that kind of moment. And this was a big moment where actually there was an enormous development in public sector accounting studies. Many people started to, let's say, to become interested in this area. And as we said before, actually public sector accounting journals emerged. So between the 80s and the 90s, what happened is a little bit what I called the golden age of public sector accounting. Some of you, I don't know, may have come across my paper, I think it's from 2019, where I claim that actually new public management and managerial reforms were actually a golden age for public sector accounting research, because it was a huge opportunity to look at how public sector accounting was working in this new managerial context. Now, you may also be aware that I have been quite vocal in terms of my critique of new public management. And actually, my paper is about post-new public management, because actually what I highlight is that we ended up in a situation where there was an enormous growth in studies, but then at the same time, those studies were all taking new public management as a reference point. So we ended up knowing a lot about accounting under new public management. And this meant also that sometimes we even forgot about like using theories. We just used NPM as the theory, and there is, you know, that there are enormous debates and discussions about whether new public management can be used as a theory or not. Some people say actually it's a bundle of techniques, it's a bundle of theories, it's not a theory per se. But in any way, my take on this is that new public management has actually flattened a little bit our ability to innovate from a theoretical perspective. And actually, I have been there myself as an author. I realized that when I wanted to write about reforms, which were not necessarily new public management, because, well, as you know, there are countries which are more neo-Weberian than neoliberal, which means that in those countries, new public management is not applied in the same way as it would be in the UK, for example, where actually neoliberalism is a very like strong kind of trend. But if you come from Germany, Italy, Spain, France, well, these are called neo-Weberian states, not neoliberal states. And then even new public management reforms there will have a different flavor. And the same may actually apply, or at least in my interactions with colleagues who are studying, for example, Asian countries, a similar issue emerged when actually you have managerial reforms which are copied and pasted from, I don't know, the UK or America or Australia, but actually there is a different context, which may be more neo-Weberian or maybe neo-patrimonialist kind of context. And we know that this is different. But in a way, this new public management thing has flattened everything, with people forgetting a little bit that context can be really different. And then it may make a big difference for how then those reforms are implemented. So in a way, what I try to highlight and I try to encourage a reflection on a few years ago was actually, let's try to avoid this idea that actually NPM is everywhere and then accounting can only be observed as what I would call an economizing force, because new public management has made us think that accounting can only translate economic principle in practice. But actually, what I have been trying to highlight is that actually there are ways out of the golden age and the golden cage of new public management. For example, as I said, what about other types of administrative traditions? There could be, as I said, neo-Weberian countries, neo-patrimonialist countries. I think like in Indonesia, I have had the opportunity, for example, to see some work and clearly there are very important issues which shape the way in which, for example, accounting reforms can be implemented. And we cannot forget about them, just trying to reduce certain countries to, let's say, copycats of what happens in the UK or Australia. Our countries are different. And I say this because, like, being Italian, I have always felt that you cannot really reduce Italy to be similar to the UK, for example. It's not like this, right? We do not eat fish and chips, right? So we eat pasta. So how can you think that even accounting reforms can work in the same way? And I think the same applies actually to many other places. I have had I have been very lucky to have some PhD students who are, for example, from Africa, and actually you can really see how you need to contextualize much more than just saying, oh, this is NPM. No, this is not NPM. This is like, let's go one step further. Let's understand the context more widely. And this is why at some point I said, well, we do not need to just look at NPM. We just need more generally to understand what publicness is. So what are the features of the specific public sector, which then will shape the types of accounting systems and accounting reforms that we will be having. And in doing this, I would like to highlight something that is quite important. So in a way, if we look at where we are going, sorry, I go back just to the initial slide when we have the various, let's say, moments of evolution. We may have had like almost 3 decades, which were dominated by new public management and so accounting as an economizing force. But today, what I have been seeing in the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years is an increased attention towards actually looking at accounting as more than just an economizing force. So let's say in the last decade or so, actually, people are starting to look at accounting as something more than just something that can translate economic reforms into practice. Of course, there is this important element, but we cannot reduce public sector accounting only to this. And this is why it is very important to distinguish, for example, between this publicness seen just as drawn from economic theories, or rather publicness seen, for example, more from a political perspective. Why this? Because in a way, if you take a pure economic view of the public sector and of public sector accounting, then you will think, okay, the public sector is there just to provide goods and services. So it's a very economic view of things. The public sector is there to provide services to citizens, which are almost customers, right? Under this economic perspective, then we can see the classic view of accounting as an economizing force, as a way to translate certain goals into, let's say, KPIs and measures, for example. And we can see how accounting also was very much central in new public management reforms. However, we find ourselves today in a situation where actually we realize that there may be more to accounting than this. And we may, in a way, if you think about this, it may also have to do with going back to the idea of accounting, which was there already in the 70s. This idea that accounting is not only an economic tool, but it's also a political tool. And if you take a political view of publicness, then we may realize that the public sector may be there to provide services and goods, but actually, first and foremost, the public sector is there to represent their communities, to represent their constituents, and then to bring forward public interest. So in a way, if we take this view of publicness, I'm not saying that the two views are alternative. They can be complementary, of course. But is there room for accounting to be more than an economizing tool? Probably accounting can be also a democratic tool. It can also be an anti-democratic tool, of course, depending on how you use it. But clearly, accounting can also be used more as a democratic force. If we think of the ways in which budgets have always been used in the public sector, budgets are actually ways in which you identify the priorities political priorities for the community, and then you implement those priorities, right? And you make sure that actually what was decided is also concretely implemented. And in this way, actually, accounting can be a tool for ensuring efficiency, but can also be a tool for ensuring a number of other values. For example, sustainability, social equity, collegiality, cooperation, participation, inclusion. So the point here is, over the last few years, what, like, in a way, what our community has tried to do is embracing this publicness of public sector accounting by exploring the potential that public sector accounting has, not only to represent more managerial values or traditional values like the representation of interest through the traditional budget, but also increasingly we have been, as a community, very interested in understanding how accounting can be a tool for participation, for inclusion, a tool for ensuring cooperation, a tool for ensuring that a number of public values are represented and reflected in our communities. And of course, it can be also a tool for ensuring resilience, environmental sustainability, and social equity. What we, well, perhaps you may know Jan van Elden. Jan van Elden is one of the, let's say, the prominent scholars again in our field. And well, almost by chance, we decided to write this piece together. And this chapter that we wrote for Hendrik Vollmer books, I don't know if you have seen that book, but in this chapter, what we highlight is that there are, let's say, there may be phases in how we use accounting. For example, there may have been a phase where accounting was seen more as a tool for political accountability than to bring forward managerial values, and today more this, let's say, pluralistic values. But what is interesting for us, like what we highlighted in this chapter, is what we should be very careful about is not to give the impression that accounting is neutral, because that's the main point. The main point is, let's be clear about which values we are talking about when we talk about accounting. And this is key in our research, but this is especially key in education. We should not give our students, for example, the impression that accounting is that objective tool, which is just there to justify in a neutral way solutions. Because of course, we know very well that one thing is to have, for example, a normal budget, which is driven by efficiency. Another thing is to have a gender budget, where there is attention to gender. Another thing is to have a social equity budget, where actually there is attention more widely to a plurality of, for example, social identities which need to be protected. So in a way, even in budgeting, we need to be careful not to say, oh, yes, the budget should be balanced and, well, expenses should equal revenues, and that's it. That's a technical rule. Yes, but how you balance it will not be value neutral. And I think we need to insist on this with our students, because sometimes I think still there are people who think, oh, this is completely objective. No, because actually accounting can serve different purposes. So in a way, in order to, let's say, to give you a little bit of, let's say, examples of how then this can be translated into practice, I'm bringing here some examples from my own research. And it's not like, I'm not trying to say that this is the only research. It's just that I know it, and I'm happy to share. And I give you just a few hints about this. I'm more than happy then to engage with any of you who would like to know more about one specific area or the other. But I just wanted to say, I really think that we are now at that stage where actually public sector accounting is being studied in its relationship with a plurality of values, and considering also more explicitly the types of context we are studying accounting in. So realizing that neoliberalism is one possible context, but it's not the only one. And there could be also other contexts that we need to accommodate. And we need to publish more about those other contexts so that we realize that there is not just one mainstream way of seeing things. The other thing I wanted to highlight is that all of this is happening in a world which is fastly digitalizing and using AI for good and for bad. So those elements are a little bit there. And we are also in a context where there is an increased like preoccupation about rising autocratization and democratic backsliding. And crises are everywhere. So this is a little bit the context where we are. And in this kind of context, then we study a number of things. We take our own, also like we pick also our theories to use and etc. So as I said, I would like just to give you a little bit of some examples of emerging areas of research, which highlight how accounting can be used to serve alternative or different values. One of those areas is, for example, resilience in a world where crises are everywhere and every day we wake up, we check the news and we see a new problem, a new crisis arising. And sometimes you wonder whether there are some people who just enjoy creating crises for the sake of it, but that's, of course, my opinion. But the point is, we need to understand that probably all of our preoccupation with efficiency may be a little bit misplaced because increasingly, in the face of crisis and continuously like new rising crisis, we need to build resilience for organizations, for communities, for even for states. So this is why one of the areas which have been, in a way, growing in the last few years, in the last decades, has been the area of resilience. And the resilience can be seen at very different angles. I provide here just an example, and sorry, this is a very dense slide. It's just to provide information, but I will not go into details. I'm just to say that we developed this research into the resilience of local governments with an international group of people. And it's interesting because we started almost by chance more than 10 years ago. With crises when they arrive. And there is also a financial focus in this. So there is also a role for accounting in building resilience. So of course, I am aware that time is running, so I will not provide more details on this. But just to give you an idea, you have the slides, so you can also have a look at what we have been doing over the years, like with a number of, let's say, countries. And of course, if anyone is interested in trying to apply those models, for example, in Indonesia or other countries like in Asia, I'm more than happy, of course, to have a chat about this. Also, you may have noticed that actually we have also launched a special issue on accounting for resilience, more generally, not just the public sector, in Accounting, Auditing, and Accountability Journal with Leonardo Rinaldi, Lee Parker, and other very nice people. So you may want to have a look also at that call, which is still open, and it's very much about accounting for resilience. And it's also probably a signal that over the years, this interest in looking at accounting, not just as a tool for efficiency, but also for building this ability to absorb crisis is one of the possibilities of widening the scope of accounting. Another area which I would like to bring your attention to is how actually you can also look at accounting as a as a tool for inclusion or participation. Just again, if you're curious, you may have a look at a paper I have written recently about citizens' inclusion in public services, and the fact that we may need probably to increasingly go beyond this idea of citizens' participation, because sometimes when we think about citizens having to participate in something, it's very much driven by the state. But what about citizens wanting to do something, or how citizens feel, whether they feel included or not? Because we know that sometimes, even in participatory exercises, there is a big issue of whether some citizens actually feel excluded by them. This has happened, for example, a lot in even participatory budgeting kind of exercises. And if you're curious, we are also developing this European project on citizens' assemblies, again, a form of participation, and we are bringing an intersectionality perspective there. But I wanted to go one step further on this, and in particular, highlight that going even beyond like this idea of, as we said, participation and inclusion, there is an increasing attention towards social equity. And of course, on the one hand, there is more tradition of looking at social equity from an American perspective. But like increasingly, we have been trying to develop a dialogue between, let's say, more some American colleagues and some colleagues also coming from other areas of the world, and trying to bring their, let's say, new meanings to the concept of social equity. So some of you may be interested in reading this polyphonic paper where each of us has brought different perspective on what we look for when we talk about social equity budgeting. I would like also to highlight that just recently we have put out a call for papers in FAM about social equity and sustainability. We will be also organizing a workshop at the University of Essex at the beginning of November. I know that, well, probably it's a little bit far from you to join, but of course you are, like, if anyone is interested, you are welcome to join. Unfortunately, it's in presence. It's not an online event. But please keep in mind that this special issue call is out and it will remain open for the next few months. So probably some of you may be interested again in this. It's a very wide call, and we would like to see very different perspectives on issues of the role of accounting in promoting social equity and sustainability, both within organizations and in societies and in our communities. So just take a look if you like. I wanted to, in a way, also give a final, let's say, message and a final reflection on this democratizing potential of accounting, because there has been another area which personally I have been increasingly interested in. And this has very much to do with trying to bring together what is happening in the public administration scholarship and what is happening in the accounting literature, and trying to bring those two communities together and have a dialogue around this. So what I have been trying to do with a few colleagues has been to observe that in public administration scholarship, there has been an increasing preoccupation about the loss of democratic accountability. I will go a few steps further. I don't know if you recognize the cap, the red cap, or some of the gadgets around, but this is very much to refer to the fact that in public administration literature, there is now an increasing preoccupation with democratic backsliding and the rise of autocracies. It's everywhere. So I think probably it's not like new, especially in certain places. And like I say, probably it's now in front of everyone more than before, also because of what we are observing happening every day, even in places like North America. But of course, it's everywhere. It's everywhere in Europe, and possibly, I guess, you will tell me whether it's there also in Asia. But we see increasingly the emergence of authoritarian populist figures who tend to, on the one hand, being very populist and expressing anti-elitist sentiment, and they are very good at using social media to spread very often some kind of disinformation or misinformation, but then using this to increase significantly their power and eroding democratic accountability standards. And basically, there are even measures of autocratization showing that over the last 20 years, there has been a steady increase in the level of accounting literature. There is an area of study which has called specifically at the democratizing potential of accounting. For example, dialogic accounting, emancipatory accounting. And I think there are ways in which actually those two streams, those two, let's say, preoccupations can be joined together. And in a way, with a few colleagues, I have been trying to bring those together. On the one hand, I have been working with wonderful colleagues, Carmela Barbera and Maria Francesca Sicilia, trying to highlight what it means to embrace a relational view of accounting, which means that accounting is not only about measurement, the pink side of the slide, but it's also about participation and inclusion. So it's also about the interaction between people, and in our case, for example, between citizens and the states. And very often, the two things are seen separately. So one thing is to measure and one thing is to interact. No, what we tried to do in a few papers with Carmen and Maria Francesca has been to try and put the two things together, realizing that one thing is, for example, when the government leads on measuring performance. Another thing is when citizens take the initiative to measure performance. Okay. So this is the kind of, let's say, reflection I've been developing with them. And the other reflection I would like also to, let's say, conclude a little bit with is my reflection about the fact that at a time when not even governments can ensure accountability standards, there is a need to reflect on how we can expand accountability concepts towards accountee abilities. That has to do with realizing that the accountability paradigm is not enough under democratic backsliding. If governments are not guaranteeing accountability, then there needs to be a way to reflect on the ability of citizens or accountees more generally to hold government accountable. For example, if a government is not active, then citizens, how can they have the power, the capacities, the tools to actually take action? And I think in a way, there is literature on movements, there is literature on dialogic accounting on this side, but my effort, and this is in a paper which has just been recently published in AAAJ, I try to show how actually you need to put those things together. If you use the accountability framework to reflect on accountee abilities, you can find ways to then identify how you can strengthen those capacities and those abilities in citizens. But of course, this is just to give you an idea about my current reflections. Happy for you to have a look at the paper, and I'm happy, of course, to reflect further on this. Just to say that on this, we have also developed a special issue on democratizing accounting with Judy Brown, Farzana Tanima, Cinderella George, and Ellen Trigida. So it's almost finished. So some of the papers are already online. So feel free to have a look at the website of FAM and have a look at this special issue. Also, I would like to highlight, especially since, of course, as I said before, there is this feeling that actually sometimes certain areas of the world are underrepresented in certain journals. I wanted to bring to your attention an effort that we did recently, again, to develop a special issue on publicness and localized-led development with my wonderful colleagues Pawana Dikari, Kelum Yayasinghe, and Danchur Wickramasinghe. And again, the special issue is now completely online, so you can find this under the section of special issues in the FAM website. And I think this was really a very nice opportunity to observe how actually like the countries, let's say outside Europe, non-Westerns, bring so much like depth to our reflections. And I think I really loved actually being engaged and having this opportunity of being engaged in this special issue. So please have a look and let me know what you think about this. Okay. Finally, I would like just to invite you to have a look. There are new papers out. And well, there is a paper, for example, on the relationship between the central government and the local governments. From what I understand, this could be something that could be of interest to some of you, but feel free to have a look at the website of Financial Accountability and Management. Have a look at the call for papers. And if you ever have like ideas about papers, feel free to get in touch and I'm happy to provide a feedback or anything. Final thing is, like you highlighted, that I am the founder and the chair and the co-chair together with Deborah Agostino of the Public Service Accounting and Accountability Group. I know that we have several members actually already from Indonesia. And if you are interested in joining, we have a mailing list providing information about events, call for papers, publication opportunities. And then we also have a LinkedIn group. So if you want, you can join, and it will be a good way of keeping in touch about future events. And I have listed here also our upcoming, let's say, events. Oh, by the way, next April, I am going to Perth. I'm going to be in Perth, and we are organizing an accounting and accountability panel for the IRSPM conference. Perhaps we have a call for abstracts open right now. Perhaps, like I saw that actually Indonesia is very close to Perth. So it's just a few hours away. So perhaps some of you may be interested in submitting an abstract and joining us. And if you come to Perth, just let me know. Oh, I was there at your guest lecture in last October, and it will be nice to catch up. But I stop here. I have been chatting a lot, so I stop here, and happy to hear your views or yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Ileana, for your comprehensive and inspiring presentation. We have learned a great deal about how public sector accounting research, and the point in your presentation, you're tracing the evolution, new public management dominance to a pluralist, interdisciplinary field. And you also criticize, the golden age, golden age become golden cage, limited theoretically diversity, and call for embracing publicness, publicness. Okay, I think this is the interesting that you propose some alternative values, alternative values, your recommendation like resilience, inclusions, social equity with the government perspective, and also citizenship perspective. And in 2025, you propose the auto criticization. I think this is the, yeah, I think this is the new research, yeah, to open our mind, yeah, to open our mind to write a paper, yeah, made a research. Okay, so now we will move on the question and answer session. Participant, you might type your question in the Zoom chat or use the raise hand features if you would like to ask directly. Okay, we have one question from Ibu Amelia. You want to ask directly to Professor Ileana?
Thank you, Pak Agung. Nice to meet you again, and thank you for this opportunity. Hello, Professor Ileana. Thank you for your
Hello.
wonderful presentation. So I have two questions actually. The first one, I noticed earlier at your speech that the research should also reflect the community in studies. So basically in Indonesia, the population is predominantly is Muslim and also other religions here. So in your opinion, is it possible to develop public sector accounting research from a religious perspective, considering that religion is also has emancipatory potential? And the second question is, how should we involve our students in emancipatory project, basically in the public sector accounting? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Amelia. I think these are very thoughtful reflections and questions. Well, you raise a very interesting issue. I think this issue of like looking at the religious element, I think this is gaining increasing traction in our studies. I must say, also as an editor of a journal, I noticed that like there is an increasing attention toward like there are authors increasingly taking more this religious stance to look at, let's say, in a way, how also religion may shape, for example, the implementation of certain reforms or may shape the conceptions of accountability which are, let's say, embraced in a certain country or in a certain organization. So in a way, I really think that you picked a very relevant, let's say, kind of issue. Definitely, it is worth like looking into this further. Of course, there are a plurality of ways in which this could be done. I have in mind that there are colleagues in Europe, for example, looking at the influence of, I don't know, Catholicism in like in how, for example, actually accounting became an oppressive forms. So like in a way, actually a religion can also be used as a kind of oppression as opposed to emancipation. So it's interesting then to see how accounting can be used both ways, hopefully as an emancipation kind of tool, but sometimes also in the opposite. So I really think that you raise an important point, and I really think that this way of contextualizing research is absolutely relevant and interesting. And I can expect that there will be probably a rise in the coming years even to look into this. About the students, I really think that actually involving students in projects, it's always interesting per se because they learn a lot. Whatever this like the project is, I think in general they will learn a lot. Sometimes we even learn from them, right? So sometimes new generations also they have different ways of looking at things. So sometimes we can also, well, the learning can be reciprocal on projects.
Okay, is enough, Ibu Amelia?
Thank you. Wonderful. Thank you.
Okay, thank
Thank you.
Yeah, so we have a next question, Samuel. Samuel is one of our international student in accounting master degree. So Samuel, you can ask directly to Professor Ileana. So please.
Yes. Good afternoon, Prof.
Good afternoon.
Yes, good. Yeah. Thank you so very much for the great enlightenment you've given to us to know about public sector accounting. I think this is a very special moment that I have as I'm pursuing public sector accounting here in my master's. And I was really thrilled and be moved with the various insight that you bring about. The question is, I want to look at what are the links between the sophistication of a country's public sector accounting system and its resilience to economic shock and corruption?
That's a very good question. I would say that, well, I think that your question is very important because actually sometimes we end up like looking at this in a very, let's say, superficial way. So there are some people saying, oh, actually, let's see, there are some data about whether a country has, I don't know, accruals accounting. Let's see whether it's more corrupted or not. The problem in the mechanism whereby if you have more accruals accounting, then you are less corrupted. Well, very often this is not the real reason for this. There is no and then they may go together, but they may not necessarily have any causality link there. So my response to you is I would not necessarily say that if you have a more sophisticated system, you necessarily are more resilient to shocks and corruption, for example. What I'm trying to say is rather that sometimes people make the difference and culture make that difference. So it's more like good countries with a very strong culture will also be, let's say, more prone to develop good accounting systems, which are also like better suited to their kind of issues and their kind of needs. So, which is slightly different from saying, oh, let's pick any country, let's adopt this sophisticated system just because it's very fashionable, and then everything will follow. I don't know if you agree with me, Samuel. I know that it's not a simple response. My response is not saying yes. My response is no, actually, you need to do more than this. And basically, why I am saying this, because I have been, for example, I have been very much involved in this adoption of accruals accounting and accruals-based standards, like standards in the public sector for the last 30 years. I have looked into this. I have suffered seeing how actually you can take a system, it can be good or bad, but then if nobody believes in it and there is no culture for using it, well, why then spending the money? If you know what I mean. So the point is, you need to have actually, you need to take a step back and look at the overall context and the difference that the tools can make for the context. And then this will also have a positive, let's say, impact on resilience, for example. But it's not as simple as saying, oh, it's raining, I take the umbrella. Unfortunately, yeah, it's more complicated than this, right? So, yeah.
It's really because, looking at the constitution of like the Africa economy, and public sector is the fundamental fabric, that enhance the success and successfulness of it. And when when public sector is broken down, then all things just derail like that, and so it has to go something of this nature, really. Yeah. And then the next question is that I want to look at how can real-time reporting of public financial data increase accountability and allow for more dynamic civic engagement and oversight.
So you said the availability of those data.
Yeah.
That's another very interesting issue, because you may say, oh, actually, you may have a quantitative study when you just say, oh, you have more data and then you have more transparency. That's it, right? But then, or more engagement. But then actually, the point is, think about the current context okay, like I don't know if it is the same with you, but unfortunately, in Europe, every day we wake up and we read the news from the United States.
Yeah.
I don't know why. We always end up reading some news about some social media being flooded with completely wrong, like data, completely like misleading information, misinformation, disinformation of all types. So the point is, what I am trying to say is, again, we need to have a nuanced view about the availability of data, because sometimes like it's very bad when data which make things more transparent are withdrawn. Of course, that's very bad, right? And this has been happening too in some countries, like data disappearing, and before citizens could look at things and now they cannot. This is very bad. But then at the same time, what happens when on purpose, like we are flooded with wrong data which are not perfectly, let's say, reliable, for example. This is the current context, right? So nowadays, paradoxically, people tend to believe more AI-generated video rather than using open data in a database. Because honestly, new generations, for example, they are used to have things that are digested by AI. And why do they then, would they go and use a database and do a lot of calculations and things? So that's one of the things. So basically, I think nowadays we need to add to those framework that we have in mind this noise and these complications that are created by living in a world which is a post-truth kind of world. I hope
Thank
I'm not making things too complicated for you, Samuel.
Thank you. No, I'm learning a lot. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, I think that's enough for Samuel's question. So I saw. Okay, Jordan.
You can check. Hello, Prof. Ileana.
Hi.
Can you hear my voice?
Yes.
Okay. This is my second time to attend your webinar. In the last year, I have attended your webinar in the first time. My question is about the probability to integrate the local culture, in budgeting into the international journal. Some of my colleagues in public sector accounting, especially in critical research, have a study about the integration about local culture and the budgeting. Like in Bali, we know that Trita Karana is a basis for public budgeting, government budgeting. But however, many of my friends, especially when they use local traditional culture in their as a basis for their budget for their research, has many rejection in many accounting journals. So can you provide some keyword for my colleague, or especially for me, because I also have a paper about culture and budgeting, and to enter the international journal, especially where in your journal in where financial accountability management. Thank you.
Thank you. I think sometimes I couldn't hear like your voice very well. So,
Okay.
So you
Yeah.
said that you have something about local like culture.
It looks like
Yes.
local, traditional, local, like Indonesia. There's so many cultures, so they try.
Okay.
Yeah, they try to propose some local wisdoms, some local culture to the budgeting, right? Like to the international budgeting. Then how the international journal will accept like that, because some of researchers are rejected when they first time submission about the local wisdom. I think that's the point of your question, Jordan. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I was not sure. Yeah, because I think at some point there was something froze. No, I think well, in a way, it's always difficult in a way to publish, whoever you are and from any country you are. Okay, so I would say that I should tell you how many times like any of my papers got rejected. I think like I have a paper which like it took me 14 years to publish it. I will not tell you which paper it is. And lots of rejections. Okay, just to give you an idea that rejections are part of our lives. So I would not be here without my fair share of rejections. I have learned a lot. Like at the time when I started, for example, there was not much mentoring, so I had to learn many things by myself. And I learned a lot, like getting a lot of rejections. So so be relaxed about this. You learn much more through rejections than anything else. I know that anyway, we also have a pressure to publish. So I know that we cannot just say, oh, wonderful, I got this rejection, I'm learning a lot. It's not like this, right? So I completely understand. You need to persist. You like from what you say, I see that actually it seems that you have a very nice idea. The point is finding the right fit, the right journal, and you're also finding probably the right theory to help with this. From what you say, there is this global trends versus local kind of practices, and there are theories which help you looking into this. It could be depending on what you're doing exactly. It could have to do with more like theories of translations, theory of global local. So I think you may find, I think from your kind of study, you may need to find the right theory, and then you need to make sure that you have a compelling story. So actually that you can really tell something. It may have to do with understanding whether you have enough evidence, enough material, that if you need more, or if you need to look at the materials differently. I can see that all of the people I know, before publishing a paper, you need to change it like a lot. So just never stop rethinking, and never stop also ask people for feedback, present at conferences, and then you will get there. So absolutely. I think from what you said, the topic to me, it sounds absolutely interesting and relevant. So just persist and fingers crossed.
Okay. So actually, I have some rejection about my paper, and I feel stressful. But for your work is motivated me to be a good researcher. Uh, Before some years ago, some months ago, I have a bad stress. I have a feeling about rejection, so I go to psychology and I have medicine for therapy. But after I take a positively meaning about the rejection, uh, I can get some positive vibe. I get some motivation to be a good researcher.
But really, don't take anything like personally, for example. Rejections
Yes,
happen.
yes,
If people continue to publish and they do not have any rejection, I feel there is something wrong there. So
okay, yes. It's
so yeah,
normal thing as a researcher.
it's like having a badge of honor. Your rejections
Yes,
are like medals, okay? That's it.
okay, okay. Yeah. Thank you for Prof. Ileana.
Okay. Thank you. Any one question? One last question, everyone. You can ask directly. Please raise your hand or typing in your question in the chat Zoom. Any more question? One last question because we have the time.
I would like ask last question from
Okay.
Dili Timor-Leste.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Prof. Anna. I'm from Timor-Leste. My name is Pascual da Costa Oliveira. Attend this your presentation from the beginning till the end. Mostly you focus on the developed countries, but as my country is newborn country, mostly deal with the LDC, less developed country, and fragile countries. Could you give an idea how to deal with those countries? And then from other perspective, from developed country, know how to deal with those things as mentioned in maybe a new Millennium Development Goals that promote by the United Nations, mostly about 15 or 17 topics about to deal with the LDC countries, less developed countries, and fragile countries around the world, mostly in Asia, Latin America, and Africa. Thank you.
So, well, I'm not sure I capture all of your question. Like your point is more about the fact that still we do not see enough studies from certain countries and how we can, in a way, develop more an understanding on what's happening in those countries, which is also relevant for the international community. I think, and you were also referring to Millennium Development Goals. So in a way, actually, in a way, it's very difficult to change a kind of framing around journals where some journals are very much like mainstream and they are very much focused on certain realities. I would say that even like a person like me, I am European, and I feel that there is a predominance of US journals or US studies. So in a way, actually, it's all relative, right? So I think actually there is an enormous need for understanding more a plurality of things happening in other countries. And if we look, like you referred rightly to the global challenges, and we are going nowhere in, let's say, working on the global challenges if we just focus on the usual countries, especially since I don't see why still the UK should be the center of the world, where it's a very small country and increasingly less relevant. Sorry, with all due respect, of course, to my to this country. But again, so actually, I don't see a reason why actually we shouldn't be learning more about a plurality of other countries, because actually also in terms of theorizing, we need to have more context to understand. So if you think about like my fixation with publicness is there are different ways of looking at publicness. And in each country, what is public is slightly different. So if you look at what a country means from a theoretical perspective, from a conceptual perspective, then any country would add to our theorizing. So, and it's more about thinking, okay, what makes this country different or equal to the others, this context, and then you can basically theorize based on this and actually add a little like piece in the overall jigsaw, rather than just saying, oh, there is only one type of word, right? So some people think, oh, there is only one way of looking at things, or there is only one theory. But actually, if we turn the context into concepts, then this allows actually to say, oh, actually, this helps theorizing better, okay? So it's even stronger than just saying, this is a different context. No, this is a context which provides a new understanding of certain concepts. Okay, I don't know if I am making sense.
Thank you. I got it. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you, because the time is up. Thank you so much, Prof. Ileana. One closing remark from you, Prof. Ileana, to us.
Actually, I wanted to thank you for your attention, for your warm participation, and actually for wonderful questions, and also for a wonderful summary of my speech. So really, thank you for this. I hope we will have opportunities to catch up again in the future. And again, at any time, if you have ideas for research, you want to have feedback, or you want to have a discussion, more than happy to be there for you, basically.
Thank
Thank
you. Thank
you.
you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Ileana, for your insightful answer, your generosity in sharing your expertise. Today's session has truly broadened an understanding of how public sector accounting research can contribute to improving governance, accountability, and societal trust in public institutions. On behalf of the Department of Accounting, Faculty of Economic and Business, Universitas Airlangga, we extend our deepest appreciation to you, Professor Ileana, for taking the time to engage with our academic community. And we also thank all participants, lecturers, students, and colleagues who join us from various places. We hope this session will inspire you to explore new frontiers in accounting research and foster future collaborations. So before we conclude, let's capture this memorable moment together. I kindly invite you all to turn on your camera for our virtual group photo. So please turn on your camera, everyone. We have 3 slides, yeah? Okay, so the committee will take a picture. Okay, so everyone give your big smile. 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you. Thank you,
Thank
Professor.
you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Bu Wiwi.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Ileana.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.